A warm welcome to our Cogit podcast series. My name is Anthony Richards, and I'm the editorial director of Cogit. The intention of this podcast series is to discuss particular themes and issues of contemporary relevance within terrorism and counterterrorism. And today's theme revolves around the issue of conspiracy theories and how to counter them. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Dr. Amarnath Amarasingam. Now, Dr. Amarasingam is a senior research fellow at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. His research focus has included radicalization, social movement activism, social media and online communities. Amongst his numerous publications is an edited volume on the real impacts of fake news, which was published actually some 10 years ago now. And he kindly contributed a chapter to our own volume in Jihadist Terror on the impact of conspiracy theories and how to counter them. So, Amarnath, first of all, thank you so much for joining me on this fascinating subject.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Great. So what I'd like to begin with, I suppose, the first question is probably a conceptual. And given the social construction of reality, which I know you've written and spoken about extensively before, how do you begin to conceptualize what the parameters are of what might constitute a conspiracy theory? For example, where would you draw the line between what one might call a conspiracy theory and a plausible interpretation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult one. I think this is where the definitions get a little tricky because as most conspiracy theorists, if you talk to them, will tell you, they'll point to things like Watergate or the Iraq War in 2003 and say, the government does lie to us. The government does keep things from us, and there are real conspiracies that have happened in the past, and therefore, a conspiracy theory is just an idea that we have until someone leaks a document to the press, or some sort of information is unearthed to basically prove us right. So there's a kind of range of conspiracy theories that they believe will eventually come to light. And so whether you're talking about, who killed JFK or the moon landing, or UFOs, or everyone, the elite in society are actually lizard people, or the QAnon idea that there's a secret cabal of pedophile elites that run the world and are actively enslaving and trafficking in children. There tends to be a kind of range, I guess, of conspiracy theories. Some more grounded in reality, I guess, than others. But I think broadly, if to define conspiracies, we're basically looking at there are people who ideas that purport to say that there's a kind of active campaign of disinformation aimed against the public by usually a globally active and often evil secret group that benefits directly from the public being asleep to these issues, right? And so that's kind of how we, I guess, broadly define conspiracy theory or conspiracy theories in terms of how they work.
Thank you, Amarnath. In the course of your research and around online communities, in what ways have conspiracy theories evolved as they relate to jihadist terrorism and extremism?
Yeah, I mean, for groups like Al-Qaeda, the conspiracy has always been kind of fairly broad notion of a combination of Zionist Christian coalition is plotting to basically destroy Islam and Muslims. Groups like Hamas, for example, have the protocols of the Elders of Zion built into some of their thinking. Others argue that things like drug trafficking and alcoholism and prostitution are actually secret plots to destroy Islam, destroy the purity of Islam. Western plots or government plots to kind of erode the purity of Islam. Sykes-Picot, for example, shows up, which is the agreement after the First World War to carve up what was left of the Ottoman Empire. I've seen some of these groups argue that nationalism, the very notion of nationalism, is a Western plot to undermine kind of the global nature of Islam. and the global solidarity of Islam, etc. All of these groups, or a lot of these groups, whether it's Al Qaeda or ISIS or anywhere in between, tend to at least once in a while dabble in this notion of the Zionist occupied government, the New World Order, the One World Order, that the people against Islam in particular are coordinated, right, or are coordinated and have an active plot against the religion. And so that in one form or another tends to pop up within their theories. A lot of the ISIS fighters that I've interviewed believe in all of those things as well. What's been interesting more recently, of course, with the rise of coronavirus and the pandemic, is how these groups have basically initially at least said this was a tool used by God himself to kind of punish non-believers for the destruction of the Islamic State in 2019, I want to say, and it was kind of used, a tool used by God to destroy non-believers. Of course, when it started making inroads into Muslim countries, they conveniently kind of dropped some of those arguments because initially it was it was assumed that this was never going to affect Muslims, is never going to affect the Islamic world, and of course that didn't last very long. So, I mean, the challenge with the Islamic State as well, and some of the literature on this, is that there have been kind of more generic end times ideas analyzed from the lens of conspiracy theories, which I tend to disagree with, because I think that's a slippery slope to basically arguing that all religion is a conspiracy theory. Is that you know, all if Islamic end time narratives are conspiracies, then you know, what is the Book of Revelation? What are Christian end times narratives? And so that there is a kind of slippery slope in the literature between believing in a conspiracy theory and then you know, thinking about basically any religious idea or any religious community as fundamentally based on something that you can't be proven anyway, and so should we call religion conspiracy theories, right? And so I'm less likely to go down that road, but that is a kind of debate that tends to happen within the definitional space.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again. So what in general, and I suppose we're looking at conspiracy theories that are very far removed, if you like, from reality. What are the sort of, in general, might be the causes of such conspiratorial thinking?
I mean, there's a lot of different theories floating around. Maybe I'll keep it simple just for the podcast sake. But I think, you know, people like Karen Douglas tend to look at it from three different perspectives, and so they'll say, you know, there's a kind of epistemic cause to what drives people to conspiracy theories, which basically amounts to a kind of need for certainty, a need for information, a need for an explanation for big events. You know, the assassination of JFK must have been something grand, right? It can't just be a crazy guy with a gun. It must be something big. And so, you know, in the conspiracy literature, this is known as proportionality bias, that big events have to have big causes. And the COVID pandemic is actually a good example of this, because a lot of the lone actor violence, for example, linked to coronavirus that we've seen, I think kind of fits within this category. Is people who are uncomfortable living in that kind of chaotic sense of something happened, you know, 3,000 miles away in a country that I barely understand, and somehow now my kids can't go to school, right? And so this idea that the kind of link between what the cause of some of these things and how it's impacting my daily life doesn't make any sense, and therefore conspiracies have a way of coming in to kind of neatly packaging some of that uncertainty with a easy explanation. Gives you someone to blame, which is quite important. Gives you someone to point to and say that person, you know, or these group of people caused it, and so on. And so I think this kind of need for information is one of the things she points to. The second thing she says is the existential kind of soothing, I guess, it provides people, is the need to kind of feel safe and secure in the world. And so again, it gives you someone to blame. It gives you a kind of neat explanation to order the chaos and kind of understand what's going on. Timothy Melly, which I kind of like, he calls it agency panic, right? So this idea that you are feeling like you're not in control of the situation. And so conspiracies have a way of giving you the tools to get that control back, right? It's giving you, it gives you a sense of there's an evil force out there. This is what you need to do. This is what they're plotting, and so on. And then, of course, there's the social motives, which I would tie into, which is kind of what I'm more interested in. Is this idea of a lot of people believe that they've been given a kind of piece of secret information and that has vested them with a kind of responsibility to now go out and wake up a sleeping masses, right? And so so it's not so much that you can take this piece of information, you know, whether you got it from the internet or on the streets and at a protest, you now have this information that nobody else has, and it gives you an enormous sense of empowerment and a sense that you've been gifted with the responsibility to now wake up the world that's been sleeping, and so that's become enormously powerful for a lot of these people, and you see that a lot with the QAnon community as well, that they can't just keep this information to themselves. They have to preach it. They have to be out there talking about it, because we are locked in a cosmic struggle that most of the world doesn't even know is happening, and I understand it, therefore I have to bring that to people, right? I have to wake people up, and so I think between kind of the psychological and social, there are some of those kinds of reasons that people have talked about.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks very much for that. So if people are looking for explanations of perhaps at the individual level, why people would embrace, adopt these kind of worldviews and conspiracy theories, I mean, you've outlined some of the reasons there in terms of perhaps almost scapegoating, perhaps, some of the circumstances that they find themselves in. Would that be fair to say?
I mean, I think I mean, for example, if you look at someone like Corey Huron, who in Canada, you know, drove his truck through the Prime Minister's residence because he wanted to talk to the Prime Minister and yell at him about his COVID policies. A whole host of things had fallen apart in his life because of COVID, right? And so he was about to lose his truck, his business had gone under, and he didn't the idea that this could be a random set of events that led to his life being destroyed didn't compute, right? Didn't make sense to him, and so he needed to kind of. So I think, you know, in the radicalization literature, we call it kind of cognitive opening, right? This idea that a certain set of events happen in your life that make you more susceptible to new pieces of information, you know, new ideas. And I think this is kind of, and Corey Huron case is an interesting case study in that regard, because now he's now online trying to understand what is happening to him, but also what's happening to the world. And all of a sudden, these 5G conspiracies and COVID conspiracies start to make a lot of sense. Of course, it's not a random set of events. You know, of course, this is planned and targeted, and a bunch of nefarious actors are at play. And so now all of the lockdowns, all of the quarantines make no sense, right? These make no sense because this is not a public health issue anymore. It's actually a bunch of evildoers and evil actors who we need to address. And so it kind of neatly packages some of these ideas for you and gives you someone to channel that anger at. And so scapegoating is an interesting word, I guess, in this regard, but it's I think it's more so that it kind of packages, it kind of makes sense of the chaos for people.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Amarnath, in your chapter to our volume, you mentioned this idea, or you refer to research that speaks of conspiracy theories as being a potential extremism multiplier. I wonder if you could sort of elaborate a little further.
Sure. So Jamie Bartlett and Carl Miller, in their 2010 report, I think, for Demos, basically used the term radicalization multiplier, and what they're getting at, I guess, is a gap in the research literature, because anyone who studies terrorism, anyone who studies radicalization, anyone who reads terrorist content or literature inevitably runs across conspiracy theories, right? And whether you're reading Inspire magazine or Dobik or whatever it is, you inevitably run across, or the Turner Diaries, you inevitably run across conspiracy theories. But what's lacking in the literature is what that means, right? So what is the role of the conspiracy within the ecosystem of extremist ideas, within the individual's life, etc. And so is it a motivation, or is it just something else that they believe that has no impact? And so Bartlett and Miller basically argue that if you're kind of already in the extremist milieu, conspiracy theories can come in to really push that forward, potentially to violence. And part of the way part of the way conspiracies do that is it makes it much easier to demonize the other, to see the other as a kind of collective, homogenous blob that's evil and out to get you. It makes it much easier to discredit critics of the organization or the group, or the idea, because it's not simply that they disagree with you in a legitimate sort of way. It's that they've been bought out by powerful donors like Soros, or they're sellouts, etc. They're race traders, and so it gives you a kind of tool to discredit others, and kind of paint the other as not just someone who disagrees with you or refuses to see the truth, but actually nefarious. And so it moves the other, the outgroup, into something that needs to be destroyed, right? And so their argument, and I think I agree with it, is it tends to kind of take what's there and accelerate it a little bit, right? And makes it easy to kind of move into violence or mobilize to violence.
Yeah. Thank you. Also, in your chapter, you sort of said that trying to tackle or confront conspiracy theories might actually do little more than just enforce them. How would you go about tackling conspiracy theories, if indeed would you at all? I mean, would government and social media giants have a role in this? Can they have a role in it? Does it depend on who the messenger, as it were, is in terms of trying to perhaps, use counter narratives? I mean, what's your view on that in terms of any potential response?
Yeah, I'm probably the wrong person to ask, because I'm tremendously cynical when it comes to this question. But I think, and I've been endlessly frustrated trying to wrestle with. I don't do it anymore, but I used to back in the 9/11 truther days, try to argue with these people, and it leads nowhere. But I think there's some good work now, basically saying, maybe forget the ideas for the time being, focus on the community that they're a part of, what they're getting out of the conspiratorial community, what's the emotional dimension at play here, and then maybe you can get to the ideas a little bit later. And so QAnon believers, again, is a good case study here, because now, because of Telegram and Gab and Parler and so on, they're part of this very vibrant online community, and they get a lot out of being part of this community and being part of this kind of online community and online movement. And so it's not necessarily sometimes even the particulars of the idea that matter anymore. So I think if we spend a lot of time, nitpicking ideas and trying to disprove them, it's not really going to do anything. It's because their role in the community and what they get out of being part of this kind of this cause is much greater and much more profound than any one particular idea. This is why when one idea is proven wrong, they can survive, they continue to survive and thrive and move on. And so that's kind of one approach that's been suggested. The other is kind of to maybe sandwich the argument a little bit, tell them, try to feed them the truth in doses. And so this has been tried a bit with the anti-vax community, who, with COVID and even before, believe that vaccinations either don't work or are nefarious, or are designed to kind of enslave the population in some form or another. And so try to kind of try to find a common ground that maybe you can be on board with, and then slip in other ideas that might crack the bubble, I guess, so to speak. But all in all, I'm not particularly convinced that any of these actually work. I think, much like with extremist groups, some of these people have to be on the way out already for any help to work. And so I think, so I've talked to a few QAnon formers, for example, former QAnon believers, and they kind of make the point that at the height of it, when I was in the middle of it, you couldn't have told me anything, right? You couldn't have told me anything. But once I started to leave, then I looked around for resources and looked around for people who can help me and groups who can help me and things like that. And so I think having a network in place, having resources in place for when people are ready to leave is probably a better use of time and money and resources than getting into these kind of nitpicky arguments all the time with people who it's very unlikely to have any impact. But much like with people leaving the far right or people leaving jihadist groups, we have to kind of be ready when they're ready to leave. So groups like Life After Hate or the you know, numerous ones that help ex-jihadists, they should kind of be ready for when they're ready to leave. But I think trying to go and get people out hasn't really worked in the past, and I doubt it's going to work with this community either.
Very interesting. Amarnath, thank you so much again for sparing the time to join us, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on expertise today. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.